Closing up a series of coaching calls that we've been having on the podcast with 30 Steps to Better Jazz playing students. It's been a lot of fun, and today's episode is a great one because I know that you're going to relate to every single one of these questions that Brent Arnold from American Fork, Utah has today. This is a great show. Questions like, how do I know whether to move on to the next thing or not? How do I know if I've gotten down good enough, if I've mastered it or not? And stuff like, how do I go into jam sessions and gigs and not let my ego take over me, not get scared, not get frustrated, not, worry about what other people think about me. I mean, so many things that we talk about in this show that I know you're going to love. We're going to dig right into all of that. But first, let's cue the music.
Welcome to the LJS podcast, where you get weekly jazz tips, interviews, stories, and advice for becoming a better jazz musician. And now your host. He's a jazz musician, author, and entrepreneur, Brent Bartstra.
What's up? Brent here. I'm the jazz musician behind the website learnjazzstandards.com, which is a blog, a podcast, and videos, all geared towards helping you become a better jazz musician. Like I said, awesome episode today. Awesome guest. It's Brent Arnold from Utah. He's a trombone player. I think that he gives Brents a good name, so I'm happy to be in the same club as him, and he asks a lot of awesome questions today. Now, this is a coaching call, kind of around my course, 30 Steps to Better Jazz Playing. Although Brent is really in all of my courses, he's a huge LJS fan, and a big thanks to him for being such a supporter. I really do appreciate him, and that he's willing to share this coaching call with all of you today, because I know that there are so many things that we cover that, man, I could relate to them, and so I know that you will too. So this is going to be really great. Make sure you subscribe to the show. We have some great shows coming up to finish off 2018. Can you believe it? It is December of 2018. Where did the year go? And we've come up with so much great content this year. So, if you finish this podcast episode, then, there's plenty more where that came from. But today's episode is a little bit longer. We go over a lot of different things. And so, it's going to be it's going to be a ride for you. So go ahead, get that popcorn ready. Go find your favorite beverage, sit down, or if you're stuck in rush hour traffic, you are in good hands today. Let's not waste any more time, though. Let's get on the show, Brent Arnold. All right, welcoming on the show is 30 Steps to Better Jazz Playing course student Brent Arnold from American Fork, Utah. Brent, I am so happy to have you on the show.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
So you're someone who is heavily involved in Learn Jazz Standards community. We were just talking a little bit before this. We started recording here that you've bought all of my books and courses, and I just want to say, first of all, publicly, thank you for that. I really, really, really appreciate, and I don't often get to thank people in person when they buy my courses and books. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I hope they've all been helpful for you. I think a great place to start is just to get to know who you are. So what does Brent Arnold do? What's the basics of what keeps you going and living?
Sure. So right now, my day job is I'm a programmer. I write apps for the iPhone and Android devices. And so I work remote, which is nice. It lets me walk down to my basement, and I have a lot of meetings during the day. I studied music in college, and so I actually have a trombone performance degree, which, of course, when someone says, "Hey, what did you get your degree in?" It's a great conversation because people say, "Well, what do you do with that?" And so, but as you know, as a musician, you have a lot of opportunities, and so I was teaching private lessons for a time, and I was playing in some bands. We did a lot of wedding bands around here. There's a lot of opportunity for that. Played in a lot of conventions, business events. And so for about 10 years, I considered myself a professional musician. And then life catches up to you. I was married, and we had a child. We were expecting our second child. And then, things kind of add up when it comes to how do you support your family. And so I made the decision to kind of switch gears and went into programming. And so it's been a good thing for us, mainly because I can continue to do music, but it's something that I don't have to, it's not a desperation to be successful in music. It's more of a hobby. And so I've enjoyed that. Right now I play in a band. It's a show band. We do jazz and rock, and it's a full big band. And so it's a good outlet for me. I'm working on my improv chops. I found your site about 2 years ago, and I've just been hooked on it. I've really appreciated the way that you're teaching and the way that you've shared the content. So it's been a good experience. And so now I'm just working on my personal goals for improvisation, and it's something that I enjoy doing on the side.
That's awesome. Yeah. And yeah, definitely the music thing. It's not easy for sure. And, it's interesting. You would know because you were a professional musician before is, that, yeah, when anything becomes a job, there's something that gets lost in there. Right. I mean, so it's great that now you're just doing it, completely for pleasure, which is super awesome. Now let's dig back a little further too, though. I'm a little bit curious. So you did say that, that's a conversation starter to be a trombone player, getting a degree in trombone. So what was it like? Let's dig back a little earlier. What was it about the trombone that got you excited?
Well, and you start in elementary school, junior high, high school, and I was successful. I was doing well. I had a good time with that, and then really for me, the trombone was just it's a low brass instrument. It's a vocal sounding instrument. When I listened to a lot of jazz, you listen to a lot of Frank Sinatra, Ella Fitzgerald, a lot of the singers, and there's this connection that you hear with the music. You feel that through the words that are sung. And the trombone for me was I just loved the sound. And so I had good success in the beginning. My parents supported me. We got some music lessons. And then what really kept the momentum was I started lessons with the professor at the local college. And so when I did that, then all of a sudden I had an in at the school. In fact, while I was a high school student, I played in kind of their third tier jazz band at the university. And so I started to get experiences early on that really kind of solidified, music for me. And so when I went to college, having this connection, having taken lessons, it was something that it was a no-brainer for me because I wanted to continue with music, and it's something that I really enjoyed.
Yeah. Now, is jazz like the genre specifically? Because I know that you like a lot of other kinds of music too, but like the genre of jazz specifically, was that like a natural thing? Like you were learning trombone, and because it's a horn instrument, there was lots to be found, to play music within that instrument. Is that how it came about, or is it another way?
I think that was a big part of it. Our high school had a jazz band. We did early morning before school, so it was a little of a sacrifice. But there was definitely a tradition. We have some really strong players and teachers at the university in our area, and so there's a tradition of high schools with good jazz bands. So for me, that was really a big part of it. I think the community having, when we would go to Allstate for high school, you had a lot of good bands. And then we also they would bring in musicians from across the country to the university. So that was a big draw. I think that had a big impact on, meeting people. If you've heard of Airmen of Note,
I have not.
So the U.S. Air Force band, they're called the Airmen of Note.
Okay.
And they're the top big band for, military bands. Every unit, every division has a military band,
right?
And there are top bands that are out there. When I was in college, a lot of my friends were actually going into the military so they could play in these big top bands.
Oh wow! Okay.
And so anyway, the Airmen of Note, they're just unbelievable. There's a trombone player there, and I don't know if he's still with the group. Anyway, the Airmen of Note came through the university, and when you go to a master class as a young student, when you're in high school, and you hear someone on your instrument, and they're just blowing you away with sound and speed and just the amazing ability, then that I think gets your attention. And so there were a lot of good experiences like that.
Yeah, that's always what I find the story of people that really end up taking music seriously, like yourself, is you're just surrounded by all these different experiences, and you end up seeing these amazing musicians play, and then that leads from one thing to the other, and then that's how the story was for me. So that's really interesting. Thanks for sharing your story, Brent. I mean, this is I think story is really important, and for example, just talking to you, I didn't know you before, personally anyways, before this call, and just how to know, you were a professional musician, and now you're in this just as a hobby. This is fun for you. I mean, you're really taking that original joy that you had when you first picked up that trombone and started playing your high school band, and now you're just continuing on, and that's such an important thing for me to know, and I think a lot of others listening can relate to you for sure as well. So, with all that in mind, I want to answer any questions that you might have that I can answer about where you are right now. It could be about some of the courses that you're in. It could be about anything jazz related that you think I can help you with. I mean, I'm here to help you, serve you in any way I can for, the next 20 minutes or so. So fire away.
Sure. So, as I mentioned, I found your site, and then I got really excited about your new course. This was back when you had originally released the 30 Days to Better Jazz Playing. And so I got in on the ground floor of that. And so that was a really good experience. And when you came out with the new version of the 30 Steps to Better Jazz Playing, I saw where you had improved kind of the way you're presenting the material. In the beginning, I think part of the challenge was there was there was a lot of material to cover.
Yes.
And some of the things were, because I had a degree in music, I was used to studying scales and scale patterns. So that to me was, I can do that. That's not a problem. But I was finding that, okay, there's other things I need to practice, practicing a lick in all 12 keys. That's not something I have been doing enough of. So the question, I guess, is what are your thoughts on when you're going through material? Do you feel like we should just hash through everything, or do you feel like we can focus on just what you need, and if you already know the other material, you don't worry about it?
Yeah, everybody's experience is different. That's definitely one of the struggles when you're, you have a course that's really available for a lot of different, people. Is there are people different levels, and so you're saying that the technical exercises, that stuff you've been doing a lot. I hear from other people that they're impossible. So
yeah, sure.
It's a wide range of things. This is what I will say with this is, for me personally, just speaking as a musician, for me personally, I always benefit from, even if something is easy like that, especially, I do mention this in the course as well, is that some of these technical exercises, they're not really meant to be a big part of your practice session. They're not meant to take up too much of your time. One thing that I've found, and you can confirm if you think this is your experience too, is, to be constantly reminded of certain things is really helpful, right? Just to, you might have done a pattern a million times, but just to say, I'm going to spend a couple minutes, you're really good at them, right? So a couple minutes, just, really quickly going over that. It's the first thing I'm going to do. Going to get my fingers warmed up, going to get my mind connected with my instrument really quick. Yeah. I think that's a really valuable thing. So with that being said, I wouldn't say in the context of this course, that you should necessarily skip them. I think you should go through them and work through them.
Yeah.
But that being said, don't spend much time on them, because obviously, where those licks are what you're saying, I need to spend more time working on taking these licks through all 12 keys. That's obviously where you want to be spending most of your time. And for those listening too as well, outside of the course, what are the things that are giving you the hardest time, and what are the things that are easiest for you? And one thing that Brent, is that in the 30 Steps to Better Jazz Playing course, I like to separate things into technique, jazz repertoire, and jazz language. Those are what I call the big three things that I just think that if everybody's doing a little bit of that throughout their practice sessions, like, that's just going to keep building a better and better musician, especially when it comes to jazz. So, think about what areas of those are difficult for you, and which ones are easy for you. So, don't spend overly too much time on those things if you don't need to. I think yourself as a musician, so do what you need to do. So, does that answer your question, sort of?
Yeah, and that brings up a good point. You may not even remember what you should practice, in the sense that, like, if I go through those exercises and I have done those patterns, But as you do them in different keys, then you realize, oh yeah, I'm not really good in, D flat or
thanks for bringing
B
that
flat
up.
or, that to me, I think that's kind of what I've realized too, is that I feel like I know the pattern, and you think, and you get lost in it's a repetitive thing, but then you realize, you know what, actually I don't know it that well in these keys. And that's probably,
that is
because
a great
that
point.
reminded me of that.
That's a great point. Yeah, that's a great point. You can always actually take something that maybe you think is simple and right. Actually, I'm thinking of an exercise specifically that I always tend to warm up on, and for whatever reason, I try to keep it easy just to get warmed up, and I do it in concert A flat. But if I think about doing it in a different key, I'm so used to doing it in A flat. It'd be a little bit more difficult. So there's always a way to challenge yourself, especially when it comes to those different keys, right? I preach that so much because I just think that gives you so much flexibility. The more flexibility you have to just play in any key, when it comes to improvising, when it comes to learning tunes, when it comes to all this stuff that's required of you when you're trying to be a jazz improviser, all that becomes so much easier. So thank you so much for mentioning that, because absolutely you could try maybe some keys that are like, what's a key that's difficult in trombone, but that would be a little more complicated for you?
Typically G flat or B. Some of those, it's just not as common. We're not playing a lot. All the repertoire for music in general, the big band stuff, we're not doing a lot of the multiple flats or multiple sharps.
Yeah. Okay. Great. So, that's interesting. So you could choose to be like, all right, well, this is easy for me, but I want to make it more complicated. Or you could choose, no, I really need to work on these licks a little better, and so we'll just make that easy, and this is going to be my harder thing on the table to work on, right? So I guess there's some different choices you can make there. But yeah, that's good. Thanks for bringing up the key thing, because that's definitely a big thing. You can always make things more challenging. Actually, there's a great episode. I'm looking it up right now so I can tell you the exact one. There's a great episode of the podcast that I did a while back. I had a friend of mine, Diego Maldonado, on the show, and he basically talks about how you can practice in such a way that I think we came up with some sexy title like fail-proof, for fail-proof performances. But he practices in this insane way where I think he was telling a story about how his teacher would have, he's a drummer, so he would have him doing ride patterns and stuff like this and certain beats and different time signatures, but have him recite like things on a newspaper at the same time. Like that was the most extreme example. That was like the most, out of bounds example. But he was going through all kinds of other things that were really valuable to take even basic things and make them, just a little bit more difficult. That was episode 120, how to practice towards fail-proof musical performances. So learnjazzstandards.com/episode 120 for those listening who might want to check that out. So, okay. Does that kind of answer your question there, Brent? I know that we went a couple different ways there.
Sure. No, that was good. That's really good. The thing that I have learned, some of the things that, I see this, of course, with guitar players or other, piano and things where you deal with patterns and you deal with, when you go through different keys, you're just moving the pattern up, and you're doing a similar pattern but in a different position. And on the trombone, and I think about other brass instruments, because I force myself, and that's part of the challenge is, you have to force yourself to go through those hard pieces, the hard things that you're not good at. And so going through all 12 keys, it starts slowly. And this is what I've learned so far, having gone through your course and working on it, is you start to see the pattern in your mind and you start to hear the pattern. And so, for example, I saw your podcast the other day, you were doing the blues challenge, and you said, blues in all 12 keys. And so,
I think it was a YouTube video I did, right?
Yeah, that's right. And so I took that challenge and I put my little band in a box and I put it in, I did in all 12 keys. And I realized that, first of all, I got through 3 or 4 keys, and then I got to the 5th or 6th key and realized, okay, I got to stop.
It's hard, right?
Yeah, it's not going to work. And so I wasn't brave enough to record my attempt at the challenge. But what I've realized, and it applies to all the different patterns, you hear, so like I have certain licks that I play in a blues lick that I'll play, and so like on the 5 chord, I end up playing these same licks. Well, I realize that I hear it in my head when I'm in the different key, and like, oh, here, this is where I play that.
Mm-hmm.
This is where I play this part. And so it's slowly, I feel like I'm slowly starting to see this evolve where, okay, I can use what I've learned in the keys that I can do well, and now I'm going to apply it into this new key. And I realize, okay, well, on the one hand, I may only have 5 or 6 blues licks that I use all the time. And if because if you get lost or you catch up to where you're at, then you play what you know. And now it's starting to become, I'm playing what I know in a new key. And to me, that I've never really had that experience before, because that's what was scary at first, was like, I don't know where I'm at. I can't hear, I feel like I know the blues, or I feel like I know the changes, but I'm in a different key and it is not comfortable. And so I'm starting to latch on and like, okay, wait, here I am. Here's that lick that I play. And now it's starting to make sense. And so it's slow is the thing. And that's where, the world in which we live, we want everything now, and I want to be better now. And so, but I feel like that's kind of, I got to remember that it's okay that it takes time. And so I think that's one of the things that I've learned, especially as I force myself to kind of go through those patterns and licks in all 12 keys.
Yeah. Music is something that you have to be so patient. It's really like you have to have your head in the long game for sure. And that's why it's also important, I mean, for me anyways, to kind of program my thinking just to like enjoy, where I'm at, like just be, of course, always pushing yourself forward, but have also a sense of being content. Enjoy what you're playing. You don't have to hate what you're playing all the time. And I think sometimes we just default to that, and that can be a drag. But the Blues in All 12 Keys challenge is a great challenge. It's not an easy challenge, but it's a great challenge because the blues is, especially as far as jazz harmony goes, like it really, at least a jazz blues, it really covers like pretty much all the main harmonic elements that are going to come up in jazz standards, or really most jazz situations. So if you're able to navigate those, through all 12 keys, that's a really great thing. Another thing to touch on what you said there was, there's different technical limitations to different instruments. For trombone, there's certain things that are hard, and for you, this changing things in different keys is difficult. I do, and guitar players listening will resonate with this. Is I get emails from guitar players sometimes that say, "Oh, should I practice this lick in multiple different positions on my fretboard because there's 4 or 5, there's multiple different ways to play one different thing." And the answer to that would be yes. You don't want to just rely on a particular shape. Ultimately, you want to be able to play in a bunch of different ways. So every single instrument has its challenges. So I'm glad that you recognize that and are owning that and working on that. So that's great. Did we talk that out there a little bit?
Yeah, I think that's good. Yeah, part of some of these questions that I had when we were preparing for this kind of goes back to the question of how long do you work on something until you got it, and because it's one thing to say, oh, I can play this lick, or I can do this in all 12 keys. Even I guess the question is how long. See, the frustration kicks in, when you're if you're beating on something and it's not you're not feeling like you're making progress, then you get a little frustrated. And so just kind of we go from each step and each week, each section has a certain amount of material. And so what are your thoughts on when someone moves on? If we just say, okay, I think I've got this, now I'm going to move on.
Yeah, this is a question I get a lot, actually. I answer this question a lot. So can you think of an example specifically of something that like recently like you felt stuck on or just unsure, like a specific element you were working on, like whether you should move on or not?
Well, so I've been working on, it's the question, like I've chosen, so I've got my little goal sheet for the licks that I want to take through all 12 keys. And so I've been working on the blues. Option number 2 has been the one that I've focused on. But the challenge is I still have these others, because I kind of chose, path 2, where I go through all 4. Anyway, I'm not making progress on the other licks that I need to do in 12 keys. And so I find that I guess the question is how do we know when we're feeling like we're done with one item and move on to the next? Because I feel like, I guess that's part of this course mentality. When you sign up for a course and you want to take it, you want to feel like you're making progress.
Yes.
And the question is, well, how much progress is enough?
Well, let's go back with that. Let's go back to what the goals were. So the goals were, and for those of you that aren't familiar with the course, the course, and this is something that you could do outside of the course, but you set goals of, certain things you want to do. You set goals at the end of this of what you want to accomplish. And so, I believe for path 2, right, you're going to take 2 licks through all 12 keys. Am I correct? So for each module, you're taking 6 keys each, right?
Yeah.
So technically, there's only 2 licks that you're trying to take through all 12 keys. If you've picked path 2, if you picked path 1, it'd be 4 of them, right?
Yeah.
So is it that you don't feel like you're getting those?
I think what it is. Is I'm finding that I can get through path 1 or path 2 of certain goals in certain modules, but then, and so in other words, it's staying on that one path the entire time.
Oh, I got you. You feel like sometimes.
Part of it.
Oh, okay. I would suggest, as far as this course, to answer this side, the more logistical side of your question, as pertains to the course we're talking about, I would say, try to stick with one path, just because it could get confusing for you, because that way, I really scheduled out all of the practice routines so that everything sort of lines up appropriately. So things might get a little bit confusing if you're going back and forth with them. And that would be my logistical suggestion there. But I would also just, whatever you stick to, just be okay with, if your goal is to, take like 2 licks through all 12 keys rather than 4, be content with that. Go through each lesson of the modules and be, this is how much we're going to do, right? That's the whole point of the course, is just to really give you bite-sized chunks. So just trust the process, right? Just trust the process. Every single step it's one step. We're going up this ladder, and eventually we're going to get to the top, but that's just one floor. Then we're going to the next one. In the particular case of this course, we have 4 floors, right? So then we finally get to the top, and we've accomplished all of our goals, and then we could do it all again if we wanted to, or move on to a different set of criteria, whatever you want to do. So that's like more the logistical answer to the question. When you're working on something like one of these licks, do you ever feel like, oh, well, it's not really good enough, and so I'm not sure if I should move on yet? Is that a sentiment that you have?
Sort of. I think it goes back to, because I studied music in school, there's this, you read these psychology books about music and how people have to kind of break the habits that you formed as a musician. And it's kind of that mentality which says you have to do it perfectly, or you have to do it a certain number of times perfectly. So for example, I remember doing, practicing where it was like, I needed to play it through 10 times without making a mistake. And so if you made a mistake in your 5th time, well, you're going to start over. And so there's this mentality of, well, I have to do it really well. So I look at it right now and I think, well, okay, I played through in all 12 keys slowly, and I didn't make a mistake, or I made I kind of glossed over it. And so then the question becomes, well, did I really learn it? Yeah. Because, I could technically get through it, but at the same time, if I come back tomorrow or 2 days later and I go to play, I realize, no, actually I didn't memorize it completely. I didn't, I was lucky to get through it that first time. And so I think that's kind of where I'm at, is it's that I got to break the old habits and kind of the expression of, getting rid of the old demons of what you had to do in the past, and how do you apply that today? Because I realized that first, what I think is perfect, that you can get kind of stuck. You get kind of too focused on it. You can
get too focused on mastery, and the truth is, like, no one's gonna master material. Like, no, if you're learning a jazz standard, like, let's just say Out of Nowhere. If you're learning that song, no one's going to master that song in a week, maybe not even a year, right? It's just endless, right? So we can get really caught up in mastery instead of like incremental progress. So let me ask you this other question. What would you have to do in order to feel like, you worked on this piece of material and you went on to the next lesson, the next day of practicing, or whenever the next time you practiced? What would be that thing that you would have had to do to make you satisfied that what you did before? Like, what would have made you feel good that when you played it again, what are you looking for exactly?
I think it's when I come back to the material a second time that, that I feel that I have it under my fingers, that I have it. It's that I'm not getting lost, because you're dealing with a lot of, especially going in all 12 keys, you're dealing with a lot of mental math in your head, or, for me, the way I work it out is I figure out the note name, not the names, but the note positions of the scale, for example, right? So it's a third or a flat third or a fourth or a fifth or whatever. And so the pattern is, 3, 5, 3, 1, 7, 6.
Okay,
1.
so you think about it more mathematically.
I'm thinking of it that way because for me, I feel like I know my scales enough that if I'm in the key of E flat, I know what the fifth, sixth, seventh, I know what the scale notes are. So in my head, I'm hearing what, I'm thinking of it as the pattern, because what I've had to deal with is I can read music. That's what I've done my whole life, is read music. The problem is hearing it and playing what I hear. That's been my goal for all the courses that I've gotten from your site, has been playing what I hear. And so it was hard. It was really hard to not look, and it's still hard today when I'm learning a new jazz standard, to not look at the chord chart, because I want to hear the chords and memorize the chords in that way. Because of this, I'm trying to separate it's my eyes. I play with my eyes. If I see it, I can play it. And so it goes back to feeling confident in that. So anyway, the effect is I end up playing, if I feel like I don't have to think as hard when I play it a second time, or I don't have to, I don't get lost in getting through it, then I feel like I know that. I feel like I know the material.
Yeah, no, I see what you're saying. No, I mean, not to get too far off topic of your original question, but it's interesting that you do think so mathematically that way. Because I can totally understand that. That's the big thing with jazz improvisation that's really confusing, is that we need to know theory, we need to know all these things about our instrument like really well, but then at the same time it's like there's this other side of it where we're not really supposed to just be hearing things and just not even thinking about anything at all, which is really difficult. That's a really big ask. So one thing that I went over with another 30-step student in an episode that hasn't come out yet while we're recording this, but it's episode 142, will be out by the time this episode comes out. He was talking a little bit about a similar issue of he was talking a lot about, well, I'm not really, how do I, when I'm thinking about outlining the chord changes or finding the guide tones or the enclosure, sometimes I get lost, and I want to stick more to the plan. And so we talk about that a little bit, and I also gave some exercises that might be good for you to check out. We won't go over them on this episode, but I'll maybe after the call I'll talk to you a little bit more about them. But if you listen to that episode, for those listening now, we go over some exercises really where you're composing ideas over, for example, a 2-5 chord progression, and you're just starting on a note, and you're only allowed to use quarter notes, 4 notes per chord, and go through, and you just try to come up with as many different ideas as you can possibly do. I also suggested him doing some quote unquote free playing, not in the sense of being avant-garde or anything, but the idea being that there's no chord changes and you're just trying to create melodies that lead anywhere that you want them to lead. I think some of those exercises are good for some of that changing your mindset a little bit. That might be helpful for you. I can elaborate a little bit more after we're done recording here. But I would say, as far as going back to the mastery thing and when to move on, I think it comes down to, what would you say is a win for the day? Like what's something that could you say, like, I have this key down pretty decent, like I spent some time with it, and it may not be perfect, but I can always review it a little bit more later on. I think you want to think that way more so than mastery. Like, for example, I have another 30-step student who, the opposite of you, the technical exercises are quite hard for him, and what he has to do is just really, with the metronome, slow it down. And he's playing through the exercises pretty slow, but he's doing them, and that's a win for him. And then he can move on. And he was asking me, well, Brent, I don't know, I'm playing this very slow. I'm not able to play it fast enough. I'm like, well, but you're making progress, right? So he moves on to the next one. So maybe if you can kind of, find an equivalent for you at the level you're at for what that means to you. I know none of this was like a surefire answer, but does some of that help a little bit?
Yeah, it does. And I think, the whole conversation has kind of helped remind me that, it is relative. It's how much time I put into it is how much I get out of it, but I can still get a lot done. And I think it goes back to that having fun. For me in my practice, I don't do as well every time, but I try to spend a good amount of time on the difficult part, whatever it is that I'm trying to accomplish. And then I always end my session with just jamming, just playing something I know.
Yes.
And so it's like, okay, I'm just going to play the F blues again. And so, because that's where I feel good, comfortable, and things like that. Well, it's again that idea of having fun, and I do feel it creeping in. The things are slowly improving.
Absolutely, they will.
It's just, it's just that I think we don't give ourselves enough credit, or we just kind of get stuck in a pattern, and really, because I have the time, I don't have endless amounts of time to play or practice, but my goals right now in life are to play by ear, to play what I hear, and to play, in all 12 keys, to learn the material in more than one key. And so those are the things that I've been focusing on. And I think sometimes we might arbitrarily set a deadline for ourselves, and then we're adding stress to our practice sessions because we're like, oh, I got to get this done because I got to improve to a certain level. And I realize it's unnecessary. I don't have to do that.
Yeah. Well, and the great thing about, what's cool about your story is that, so you used to be a professional musician, and, and obviously you care a lot about music. That's why you care. That's why you care about all this stuff. You're asking all these questions, you care a lot about it. But, the truth is you're in your position, especially, it's not that if you don't learn how to play this song by next week and are able to, play amazing solo over top of it, it's not like, you're going to lose you're not going to be able to put bread on the table for your family. Yeah, that's not the case at all, right? This is, music is supposed to be fun, first of all. And, that's especially someone in your position, that should really be, and even for me too, honestly, this is something that I have to tell myself regularly, this is supposed to be fun. I don't need to be so stressed out about, it's just a process. It's a journey. You work on things that are going to help you improve. You do a little bit of the stuff that just makes you feel good, like playing an F blues. You're great at that. You feel comfortable with that. That should be a part of it, of all of this, right? Is just having fun with it. And trying to think about the learning process as being fun too. It's not like, crap, I'm not able to play this. I wasn't able to integrate this the way I wanted it to. All this stuff, like you said, it creeps in, it comes in slowly, and it's like, the more you build up the tower, the bigger it gets. That's just how it works. Does that help clarify anything there?
Yeah, very much so.
Awesome. Anything else?
I guess just kind of one of the bigger questions, and you kind of touch on this in some of your podcasts and YouTube videos. You can play really well at home. You can have a really good practice session, and then you're put in a situation where, like they have some open jam sessions around here, and, you go and you're just nervous and you're feeling like, okay, I should be able to play this, but then you're just barely getting through it, and the confidence isn't there. Because, if I'm pushing myself where, like, I feel comfortable playing music where I'm reading something and I'm playing in a band or playing in a small group, if I'm reading it, I have a lot of experience with that. But when it comes to soloing myself and I'm the only one, I don't have a lot of experience with that. And see, that's where I need to, it's getting the practice, the good experiences in the practice room out in a live setting.
Yeah, totally. I think part of this, so there's a lot of layers to this, and I will not pretend to tell you that I have it completely figured out by any means, but there's the layer of just, if you're uncomfortable with something, and you don't feel like your experience with something, it's going to be difficult. So there's the whole exposure psychology thing, right? Where you just keep, slowly exposing yourself a little bit more to a difficult situation, and, until you become somewhat more comfortable with it, and of course supporting that with trying to build up those skills, right? So, which is what you're doing. I think what you're doing is good because you're actually putting yourself in those situations. But we all have big egos, that depends on who you are, I guess, but everybody has an ego for sure. Yeah. And, me included for sure, that I don't want to look like I don't have everything together in front of people, especially if I'm claiming I'm a musician, right? I want to be awesome, right? I think all of us really struggle with this. I'll tell you like something that I've been working on with this. And I was really practicing this last night at my gig. Is I was headed to the gig, and I was thinking to myself, my only goal tonight, it's going to be just to like have some moments where I'm like just completely happy. Like I'm not judging anything, and if I can just get to some moments there, it doesn't have to be the whole time, but I have to be enjoying myself. I have to have some moments that are really good. I can't go into it thinking, well, if I don't take the best solo I've ever taken, or if I don't, fill in the blank, well, that's just not the right mindset. So that might be something too that maybe you could try that I'm really working on personally, is just trying to go into these situations, trying to understand why I'm doing it in the first place. It's to have a good time. It's not to prove anything to anybody. It's not to, you don't have anything to prove to anybody, So
it's really interesting because, I was just going to say the thing that I'm dealing with, and maybe others who are in a similar situation where, let's say you've played for a while and then you haven't, and you took a break and now you're coming back into it. In this area, there's only so many musicians that are playing regularly. And so the last time, I took a break of about 10 years of not playing live publicly. Well, the first gig that I had, I was playing with people who I had played with in college. And so going into it, I was just like, oh man, I haven't seen them for years. I don't know what the expectation is, but, and the funny thing is I don't even remember what they thought of my playing then. And so, but for whatever reason, you're just so nervous. You're just like, I'm seeing people that I respect and I, want their approval, and yet the reality is that everybody's kind of in their own world. Everybody's kind of focused on their own. I wish I was playing better, and so that's kind of what I've been dealing with. Is just this. It's more than just stage fright. It's not so much stage fright, which I've had and dealt with. It's this guy knows who I am and knows how I used to play. And if I'm playing for the first time in 10 years in front of them and I'm just messing up, it's a little more stressful. It's just, and of course, I probably shouldn't think that way, but that's kind of where I'm at. Is that it's the fear of somebody else is going to judge me who knew me before, because maybe I haven't kept my chops up as good or what.
Yeah. No. Well, yeah. I mean, easier said than done to, try to go in and be like, I don't care what anybody thinks about me. I mean, and it is a weird phenomenon that, of course, it exists in probably everything in life, but it really exists in music, is that we're all very worried about what each other thinks about each other. It's a very weird thing. It's... the best advice I could give you is maybe just some of those things that I'm saying I'm working on is just, come into it and, just try to establish what your real goal is. It's not to impress anybody. I mean, those are destructive thoughts anyways, right? To just, you're going in and the immediate thought is, well, I have to impress so-and-so because, he thinks that, or I don't know, or he's really good, or something like that. That's a self-defeating thought, anyways. Again, easier said than done. But I think all of this stuff, and I'm sure a therapist or a psychologist would probably agree, it's really about programming your mind to think differently. It's not like there's not like a special magic wand that can be waved or anything. But sometimes I hear from people that, music hasn't been a very big deal in their life. It really has been purely a hobby, and that's not the case with you. It's been something that's like used for, therapy almost. I actually had someone else on the podcast that said that. And it shocks me because that's just not my experience with music. But when I hear people like that, it's very inspiring to me because they don't really have so much of their ego wrapped around this whole thing called music and how well they can do it or how well they cannot do it. They're just more interested in getting better at it for their own self. So if we can just get a little bit of that might be helpful, right? So,
well, and it's just getting out of our own heads, getting out of our own way. And because the reality is after these experiences, when I was coming back to playing, I got through it. It was fun. It was a good experience, and it wasn't terrible. It wasn't, I have played better for sure, but the things they're still my friends. They still talk to me. It's not, it's not the end of the world. And so I just have to remind myself.
There's no earthquakes. Well, at least you didn't cause it, right? So
exactly.
I mean, that's the good news. Well, you're not alone, that's for sure. We're all in that together. I think everybody can probably relate one way or another. Well, Brent, I want to thank you so much for being on the show, and I hope that some of this helped, and that this call was helpful with some things, even if it was just talking it out. I hope it was helpful. And again, I want to thank you for being such a great supporter of Learn Jazz Standards, and I'm glad that to hear that all this has been helpful for you. And maybe we'll be checking in with you later on down the line just to see how you're doing.
Sure. No, I appreciate it. Yeah, this has been a really good experience. I have enjoyed your content for a long time, and I think you need motivation, and so your courses have been very motivational, and especially with your podcast and your YouTube videos. So thank you for doing that. I know you don't get all the appreciation from your readers or people who are listening. I don't know how often people are emailing you, but I've certainly enjoyed it.
Yeah, a lot of people emailing me. That's a daily struggle, but But thank you so much. This was not a paid endorsement, by the way. Just everybody listening, I'm not paying him to say this.
Nope.
But yeah, thanks so much. That's really kind of you to say. Appreciate it. All right, Brent. Thank you so much. Appreciate having you.
Yeah. Thanks.
That is all for today's episode. Thank you so much for listening. Again, a big thanks to Brent Arnold for just being available, for allowing this to be shared with you. I know that you learned something today, and I know that I learned something today too, so that's a plus for me. Hey, if you want to join Brent Arnold and many others who are in my 30 Steps to Better Jazz Playing course, you can, of course, do that by going to 30stepstobetterjazzplaying.com. That's 30stepstobetterjazzplaying.com. I'd love to have you in there, so please feel free to visit that. You have to take a free mini course before you can get invited into that course, but it is worth your while, and you'll learn something there too. All right. Hey, make sure that you leave a kind rating and review on iTunes or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Helps other people know this is a show worth listening to. Now, lots of great stuff coming at you for the rest of 2018. Stay with me, stay subscribed. I'm really excited for all of this coming up, and I'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to the LJS podcast, brought to you by LearnJazzStandards.com. Subscribe to the series on iTunes, and don't forget to join our jazz community at LearnJazzStandards.com/newsletter.